Good morning, everyone. You're all very welcome to this, our third conference for ACES, and it's really to explore how we can lead a trauma-informed system into the new decade. And I have to be careful here because I did make a promise to the Minister that I wouldn't lift his notes or he'll be in real trouble if I sit down. Now, it would be remiss of me at the start of the conference not to thank Kieran Downey for the commitment and the vision and the belief that he has shown over the years, because I'm the new incumbent, but he's done all the groundwork. And I just want to personally thank him, and I think we owe him a debt of gratitude in terms of what he's done to get us to where we are now. As well as that, I want to thank Helen and all her team. I think not only for organising the conference, but for all the work they do in the background that have helped all the agencies to get where we are, to be able to develop the posters, to be able to develop the projects, and we're still on that journey, but they have done a lot of work in the background and it's much appreciated. The reference group itself was originally set up to create a space to really try and agree a regional approach to ACES, and alongside that we've had the Children and Young People Strategic Partnership and the Safeguarding Board for Northern Ireland adopting ACES as a strategic priority. And collectively, we've been able to influence policy and practice development in respect of ACE awareness and trauma-informed practice across the agencies, and I think that's a very positive place to be. Probably one of the fundamentals of the ACE reference group is to share and learn from research knowledge. And today we will hear, apparently now by Skype, from Professor Mark Bellis, Professor Mandy Davies, and James Kerr. I know that we learn much today which will help us focus on how we can move forward collectively in leading a trauma-informed system into this new decade. Equally, we must also be able to reflect and challenge what we've done to date and be sure that we are taking a strength-based and evidence-based approach to the development and delivery of our services. So we have the opportunity to explore how we can take the learning and transform our system's response to childhood adversity. But perhaps even more importantly, through our collective leadership, we have the opportunity to shape that future and make it happen. And in that sense, we can be the change. All right, thank you.
Without further ado, suppose, folks, I'm going to hand over to our new Minister, our Minister for Education, Peter Weir, just to open our conference for us. Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you.
May I offer a very warm welcome to everyone who's come along to this, which is the third ACE conference in Northern Ireland. To echo the programme for government, I think it's important that all children and young people in Northern Ireland deserve the best start in life. I think it's one of the most important things that government can do, which is to make sure that vulnerable children and young people in our society are recognised and indeed help to flourish and enjoy positive and fulfilling lives I think we want all our children to have. And that includes children and young people who grow up in unsafe and insecure environments. And for those of us who grew up in a safe environment, we should all be thankful for the upbringing that we got. But unfortunately, that is not something which is always afforded to every child. And for many children, their day-to-day and daily experiences are stressful and traumatic experiences. We can all learn from each other. The 5 Nations trauma-informed ACE meetings allow the 4 UK countries and the Republic of Ireland to share their experiences as that works. And against a background where money is always tight, where there is difficulty in finding out, developing those best practices and learning from one another in terms of our experiences will be critical as we move forward. But most importantly, you know how ACEs are not a child's destiny. Nothing is fixed in stone. We can offer hope, create trust and build resilience in our children and adults who've experienced adversity in early life. And you know that by working together, we can make a real difference to people's lives. The conference today is also about leadership. A significant amount of leadership has already been demonstrated through the work that has been undertaken to date, particularly through EITP and the work of the ACE reference group, which has been embraced by so many people across the various public agencies. Of course, there's more work to be done. Well, I intend to lead by example. I would ensure that awareness of ACEs and the need for trauma-informed services have a prominent place both at the executive table and in policy, strategy and service delivery as we go into this new decade. It's my firm intention that ACE and trauma awareness remains on the Northern Ireland Executive's agenda, and where better to start than with one of my own department's areas of lead responsibility, the Programme for Government and Children and Young People Strategy. As you know, the outcomes of that of the Programme for Government is that we give our children and young people the best start in life, ensuring that they grow up in a society which supports them to achieve their full potential. And particularly relevant to today's conference, I want an education system which all children, particularly the most disadvantaged and vulnerable, can feel protected, cared for and safe, where we will develop their resilience, provide positive well-being and help them to prepare for life after they leave school. The strategy will be followed up by a 3-year delivery plan, and that will set out actions that departments will take to improve the well-being of children and young people across 8 high-level outcomes. I've told my officials also to make sure that the plan includes an action on ACE and trauma awareness to be addressed by all the departments. In short, it's clear that there is much good work that is being done. There is much good work happening at present, but there's much more still to be done. Discussions that you have today will be an important part of that journey in helping us to understand better what we all need to do to provide that leadership on this important issue and how we can work better together to improve outcomes for children and young people.
I just want to take a little bit of time to talk through how we have been looking at costing the impact of ACEs. There are all sorts of ways of describing what the cost is, if you like, but largely societally we tend to describe costs in a way of comparing things by financial and cash values. So while we all understand that there are many different ways of describing costs, I just thought I'd take a bit of time to explain how we do that, and if the signal lasts, perhaps use that to reflect on your local, on Northern Ireland, in terms of costs. WHO about a year or so ago, and that shows, for instance, that if you look at some simple things, there's a 40% increased chance of obesity in adulthood, 20% increased chance of low physical activity, but then there's a 100% increased risk of heart disease as an adult, 50% increase in diabetes. There's a much stronger relationship with things like mental health problems, so up to 4 or 5 times the risk of depression, about 6 times the risk of things like sexually transmitted infections. And although I'm not going to go through everything, the reality is that we can say something about at least how the health and some of the social behaviour risks things increase as people's levels of ACEs increase. So the idea of this piece of work is to say, if we know in a population roughly how many people are exposed to adverse childhood experiences as a child, and then we know what that does in terms of increasing their risk across their livelihoods of things like antisocial behaviour, criminal behaviour, poor health outcomes, and a variety of other things like that, then we should be able to do something to convert that into a cost to society, some of which will fall on the individual, some will fall on health services, some of which will fall more generally on the economy. These are very expensive things in terms of society, in terms of the loss of economic productivity, pressures on health systems and things like that. When we convert those costs, for instance, the cost for alcohol alone, for the 25% of alcohol across Europe, comes in at about $143 billion per year. When we're talking about cardiovascular disease, that cost per year is about $185 billion. So the cost for ACEs, if you take it on a European basis, per year, and this is a conservative cost, because we're not covering all health conditions, and there are things, criminal justice issues and other things not captured in this package. It's about £580 billion per year minimum that is the cost of the impact of ACEs just on a European basis. Some of the brief learning from that, most of the costs fall on people who've got 2 or more ACEs, although there are significant costs for people who've got 1 ACE, which is important. Other things worth bearing in mind is while we've seen these costs, we know that we have way. We can stop these costs happening about investing in early years, supporting parents, tackling some of the impacts of inequalities, providing trauma-informed services. So this is not all doom and gloom. This is a way that we can tackle these issues, improve people's lives, and given the costs that we're facing, save enormous costs across the society.
My name is Mandy Davis. I am the director of a project in Oregon called Trauma Informed Oregon. And I'll tell you obviously about all of that as we go through today. But a couple things I want to start with is just a big gratitude to SBNI for bringing me here so we can do some cross-learning. I'll be able to visit some places and hear about some places. The posters are amazing. And so the biggest message to you to know right now is that I think you're doing amazing work. Like, this is great stuff, right? Trauma-informed care, the movement, is really built on people having complex trauma. So trauma in childhood, and then that creates more trauma. They got aged out of systems, they got treated by systems, and all of that comes together. We make a very big distinction between trauma-specific services and trauma-informed care. Trauma-specific services are some that your organizations provide. They're interventions for us, they're interventions for individuals, families, and groups that reduce trauma symptomology or promote post-trauma growth. But the intention is to help individuals, families, and groups. In white dominant society, they come with acronyms like PCIT, TREM, I could go on, right? EMDR. I say white dominant society because one of the things in the States, or in Oregon specifically, we're trying to do is actually get funding for what we call traditional healing methodologies, right? Grandma on the corner might be doing a really great job because everyone comes to her house and tells her what's going on, right? So how do we find grandma, community health workers, and community-based work that doesn't require certifications? And you just gotta have both, because different approaches. So trauma-specific services, that's not the same as trauma-informed care, which is using this knowledge about trauma, adversity, and toxic stress, and doing your program services differently, changing policies and procedures. But I want you to hear that, because this is going to be really important, is that the state said, this is really critical stuff, and we need to fund it, and then had the wherewithal to get out of the way. So they handed some money to a public university called Portland State University and said, hey, you all have been doing this work already. Could you take this on and help entities meet our policy? Because here's what I'll tell you. I have been resisting and will continue to resist. If I'm ever in a regulatory position, I will lose credibility. So having the partnership with the state, a lovely partnership that they can be kind of the, you need to do it, and I can do that, let me help you, has really been a reason why it's worked so well. Because when you mix those two things under the same roof, people get not so nice with each other. When you're telling me how to do it and then you're holding money back if I don't do it, it gets a little tricky. Here's what's worked and here are the challenges related to that. So first of all, it's been really important that we build credibility. Trauma-informed care, I don't know in Northern Ireland or in your area in general, but it's become quite a buzzword. I'm trauma-informed, you're not trauma-informed. Like we also use it against each other, right? You're not trauma-informed enough. And I'm like, you know that no one knows how to quantify it, right? So let's not get too in there, right? So building credibility, and we've really been able to do that because we are grounded at a public university. And that's just been really, for us, that's been really successful because we are not in competition for money for many of the organizations doing the work. And everything we do is free and accessible to all folks. So that's been really important to us, is to have that state money, taxpayer money with a public university to be able to have us have credibility around that. Another way we have credibility is by partnering with organizations doing the work. So again, the Science University, as well as Oregon Health Authority, as well as other departments. The other thing that builds credibility quicker than anything else is involving folks with lived experience. So again, we pay for that, we acknowledge that, we really center that work. We also have really been responsive to, we have a collaborative, so anyone can join our collaborative, but we really listen to what people need. So people for a while were like, we need training. It's like, great, okay. And then people were like, we need to know what to do next. So we really try to jump in there and be responsive to where the movement, so staying really flexible about where we need to head. Because all of a sudden the groundswell comes, it's like, great, we don't need to do foundational training anymore. You got that. And what I need to do, I need to use my kind of time and energy now to help you figure out how to measure what you're doing. That's where we need to put our effort. So really be able to listen to folks. And again, we go out and spend our funds to go out and listen to folks about how they're doing that. A big challenge on that, as you might understand, is maintaining credibility while things are changing so rapidly, right? Because it's real easy to get stale, and your constituents aren't going to let you do that, right? Well, Mandy, what is the ROI? Trauma-informed care in a hospital. I'm like, okay, give me a minute. And I got to go back and figure that out, right? So that's just, that's kind of that challenge of doing that, staying on the front end of things. The second thing that sounds really social worky-like, I don't know if your social workers are the same as my social worker, but it's true, and leaders, this is actually your job to me, is you have to hold the complexity of this work. It is not a one and done, and we all know that. We love to say that when it benefits us. Well, it's not just about training. Like, I know. Right? It's not just about A programs. Like, I know. But if it's not about those things, then what are you doing to help your staff hold the complexity of this work? It is messy, and there is not a direct line. Right? It's not about if you do this and do this and do this, this will come up. So we are still trying to find the research about the outcomes of these things. So being diverse and dynamic, making sure, and it's also different for us in the Department of Justice. Again, a correctional facility's trauma-informed care is going to look a lot different than a preschool, and it should, right? But that makes it really challenging for me to develop materials that are generic enough and allow people to modify them to work for them is the way that you want to think about it, right? So again, trying to continue to reach all the areas, differences of standards and process. As soon as you go in and say, this is how you're trauma-informed, people stop listening to you if they're being nice. They're not being nice, they start throwing things at you, right? Like, I think I know. So to be real, but again, that takes time to know what it looks like per population and per system. So spending time on finding out who does that. And then the final thing that we have done a lot of work on is leveraging and networking and connecting, which is obviously what you're doing sitting in this room. The only things I want to say about that, because you have a lot of experience that, is, again, I can't stress this enough, start with what's already happening and how is it working and who is doing it. The last thing I'll say is that in the Oregon we call trauma-informed care a people's movement, and the people's voice has to stay in it. If the people guide you on what to do, then you're less like, again, you're not like, we are trauma-informed, because that's not trauma-informed. The last thing I'll show you about our people's movement is we held a conference, we had over 200 people, 400 plus folks showed up. We had an artist there, she went to every single workshop, and they developed a vision. I thought it was going to be a pretty roadmap, very linear, I like linear things. I like linear things. Like do this, and then we do this. Like it's going to be a roadmap across the state of Oregon like they all are. This is what we got. At first I was like, what do I do with that? and of course I love it. But it's a really lovely vision that came from the people. And what you start to see in that is you see everyone's face in that, right? Lived experience, you see liberation, you see kind of person first, you see healthcare. And so this is now our vision that we ask every organization across the state of Oregon, what are you doing in any of these boxes or multiple boxes to advance this vision? And that's the question they stand with. All right, on that note, thank you.
Without further ado, I'm going to be now very trauma-informed care, and I know there's a number of people who are sitting in the room, and I need to have self-care for them. They are the people who have, over the last year, contributed and been part of a leadership development initiative that we've been running across the system, funded by our safeguarding colleagues, trying again to develop a trauma-informed nation, really, and providing some leadership skills to people who they can maybe do and employ trauma-informed practice across our system. So just before lunch, we have 4 presentations. The first section, we're going to ask Jackie Montgomery-Devlin and David Brown up from the faith sector to share with us their journey in terms of systems leadership.
So I'm Jackie Montgomery-Devlin. I'm head of safeguarding for the Presbyterian Church in Ireland. I am new to the Presbyterian Church, less than a year, but very excited to join what is the SBNI Interfaith Group as part of my role. And that includes some of the other faith sectors, Church of Ireland being one, the Methodist Church and the Catholic Church. So, I mean, from what I've seen today, they've done fantastic work, and I'm glad to be a part of that now. And from that then, I was offered the opportunity to be the Change Leadership Programme. And having worked with SBNI, in particular Helen Mackenzie, in my previous role in Bernardo's, my experience has been I couldn't have achieved as much as I could have without the experience or without the help of SBNI. So really felt glad and blessed to be a part of this and offered this opportunity, because there's been so much support there from the SBNI. I've accessed the training and the trainers training, and a big part of my role is to organise training throughout the Presbyterian Church across Ireland, and we're talking over 540 congregations.
It has been a very enjoyable and enriching journey. I agree with Jackie on that. There has been a lot of learning that has been new for me, a lot of learning that has been familiar in terms of my own practice as a youth and community worker over 25 years. I have felt on occasion a bit lost. Wasn't sure what path I was on, or what path, maybe more importantly, I needed to take back to my own denomination by way of information and advice. And the team within this programme have been fantastic on the phone and on the email, and making sure I'm in the right place at the right time. So Sheena, thank you, and others, and Stephanie as well, for your help on that. As part of the live project, I have delivered the trauma-informed practice workshops across Northern Ireland for clergy and for youth workers within the church. I'm going to be honest with you, there's been some strong and some robust conversations around trauma-informed practice, particularly with clergy, who see day in and day out people at a very broken part of their life or their life's journey, sometimes towards the end of life, of course, sometimes in the middle of a crisis that has emerged, being called out at 4 o'clock in the morning, maybe alongside the police service, maybe alongside health professionals, to be present with that family or that individual in extremis, you might say. And I've really learned a lot that they too go home and sometimes don't know quite what to do with their own experience of their parishioners' trauma, of their parishioners' well-being, and how to live with that and deal with that. So the issue of vicarious trauma or secondary trauma cropped up in our conversations in the training. And we also, certainly with clergy and with our youth workers, we do come as a church with a theological point of view, or you might say theological points of view, and being able to read across trauma-informed practice in terms of how the church sees itself or talks about itself. The use of language remains an ongoing debate, and one we need to continue to grow and learn from.
So I'm head of programmes for Bernardo's, based here in our office in Belfast. We're obviously part of a much larger UK organisation, but we're still we're a big presence here in Northern Ireland. I'll not talk about what Bernardo's does. I'm hoping everybody's reasonably familiar with us. But we're a children's charity. We've around 50 services working right across Northern Ireland. Lots of different groups of children, young people and families, from early years, residential, disability, children who are just leaving the care system, and a lot of more recent work around newcomer families and refugees. So a very, very wide portfolio, a very diverse workforce as well. So our UK organisation decided a few years back that they would make a very firm commitment towards becoming a trauma-informed organisation. So the work that SBNI have been doing here has been really good timing for us. And there was also wider work going on in the community and voluntary sector too around this. So there was a real energy about it. So when it was decided internally at UK level that this would be an important way forward, Northern Ireland were really enthusiastic and early adopters in the process. So UK-wide, there's been a commitment to providing training for every member of staff, and that's not just children's services staff, but that's staff from every part of the organisation. So retail, fundraising, properties, finance, all the various support teams that we have. So that's quite an unusual decision. It's the first time the organisation has made that level of commitment to something, which gives you an idea of just how serious they are about it. We've also established a local implementation group. So the training in some ways was the easy bit, not underestimating the logistical challenges about getting folk together. But once we had people in the room, delivered the training, that was kind of big tick there, that was done. But that really was the easy bit. We're now in that space of, okay, now what? Now what do we do? Folk have gone back to teams with lots of questions. Some people are really enthused. Some people are feeling a bit confused. Do I keep doing what I'm doing? What do I need to change? Tell me what it is I need to do. And to help us with some of that, we've created the local implementation group. So that's a group of quite a wide group from all our different, trying to represent as many different kinds of services, trying to get a good geographical reach of the different places our work is in. And that group are going to meet regularly, just really to have a bit of a pause, to have a safe space to talk around some of the barriers to taking this forward internally in the organisation. Where can they see there's going to be challenges? What kind of support are they going to need to take this forward? And what ideas do they have to help us become a more trauma-informed organisation? So we're developing our Northern Ireland specific strategy. So we're very lucky, it's a big UK-wide commitment, but we need to now go, okay, but what does that look like in Northern Ireland? What do we need to be thinking about in terms of our specific context here, our particular workforce issues that we might have, and what does the population here in Northern Ireland need from us to help them on their journey? So we're having really open and robust conversations, not just in the implementation group, but supporting teams to have those conversations as well. At senior management, it's now a key item every time we meet to look at, okay, what's going on with folk? What have we heard about taking this work forward? What are the challenges? What do we need to think about? So the strategy at this stage is in an early stage. We're hoping it'll be ready, an initial draft ready in April. We're excited about it. We know it's going to be a long journey. So at this stage, we're saying a minimum of 3 to 5 years in the first instance. Hopefully this will become something that, as I said, becomes part of our DNA. But there's also something really important about setting some milestones, having some realistic goals. But we're being cautious. We want to move slowly, but purposefully. So moving forward, and this is a 3 to 5 year plan, we're not going to have all this done in the next couple of months. We have identified some really key things that kind of are the structure of the organisation that we feel we need to look at in terms of staff wellbeing, vicarious trauma, and also how we can inform then the work that we're doing with children and families.
Belfast Trust, we had 4 senior staff from across the organisation that attended the Be the Change Leadership Programme. Myself from Children's Community Services, Mary O'Brien from Mental Health Services, Brendan McConaughey from Organisational Development, and Dr Andrew Thompson from the Children's Hospital. And we deliberately tried to keep it as wide as we could across the organisation. I suppose through the life of our project, we've also received much appreciated support from Sheena from the SBNI, and also from Owen Farley, who's my admin and governance manager, and from some of the staff who attended the Training for Trainers programme as well. So we were able to do that collectively. We had much discussion about where we should start. We have an organisation of 22,000 staff, and I think, as Jackie said, it can be overwhelming to see where you'd start. So I suppose in recognition of the pivotal role that our administrative staff have on the provision of frontline services, and acknowledging the current lack of structured support that is offered to them despite the very challenging environment that they work in, the Be the Change leadership team chose to focus our efforts on this particular group of staff. So we had an administration staff group that came together from mental health services, so those who were involved in completing some of our serious adverse events following suicide. We had them from Children's Services, where they're involved in minuting our child protection case conferences. From our Children's ED department, where they're very much involved in those children who come in with very serious injuries or life-limiting conditions. And our frontline reception staff, who are very much the front line and very often the first person that service users come in contact with. So Mary's now going to share the story of our project with you.
How can we offer a safe, compassionate and quality service to our service users and carers if our staff are stressed, tired and feel unsupported in their roles? The best way to be a caring, supportive, learning together organisation is to care for our staff, to enable them to care for the people we serve. This is the message we want to convey. Each and every member, regardless of role or band, count. We collectively are the trust. Trauma-informed leadership is our responsibility. The challenge is to recognise this and join the dots. ACEs, signs of safety, be the change, think child, think family, staff care, collective leadership. One message, we all count, understanding and compassion opens a new lens and new possibilities.
So our next steps are to share this project with our executive team and hopefully our senior leadership team, and to start the conversation about how we might take this work forward for the Trust as a whole.
So I stand before you today looking at what a trauma-informed prison service could look like and some of the work that we've already done. So what we looked at whenever we were given our live pieces of work were the 4 areas of human resources, service redesign, improvement, physical environment and governance. And what we recognised is that we could tie that into 3 phases, primarily those coming into custody, whenever they're in custody and pre-release. But that's not forgetting, and just reflecting back on the presentation we've just seen, a lot of that also refers to the staff and partners who are coming in and out of our establishments and in and out of PECs and our courts every day. We have a document called Prisons 2020, and it is our strategic plan and view of where we want the prison service to be by March 2021. Everyone coming into the prison service now receives the level 1 training, and I know that Brian is working on bringing that now up to level 2. So that is something that is ingrained from day one, someone coming into our service. But thinking about the care of the staff and how we deal with the staff and the trauma that they can be bringing in with them, and prisons aren't always nice places, and there's trauma in there, so looking at how we can support them. The end of this month is the first anniversary of Prisons Well, which is a series of initiatives and innovative approaches that we have put in place with regards to our staff and how we support both physical, mental health and well-being within the prisons. But the one thing, and I suppose reflecting on what the Minister said this morning, I'm actually really chuffed that the first thing that's at the top of this slide is also the first policy that we have put in place in the last sort of year, 18 months, that has dedicated trauma-informed lens to it. And that's something that is key for us moving forward, is that everything that we do, should it be buying new vehicles, should it be how we recruit our staff, how we design our new accommodation, has that lens. Our autism-friendly visits, we now have children, and this is something that we're really chuffed with in Maghaberry. We now have children visiting Maghaberry who have never seen their father because of the traumatic impact of coming into visits with our dogs and just the environment. So we have set up now autism-friendly visits where those children can come and see their fathers. And that might only be a handful of men and their families at the moment, but that's a huge thing for us, and that's something that we're really, really proud of. And it is now bringing me back round. I recognise the impact of this work, the impact that it could have on our prisons, the impact that we can have on the people who come into our prisons, who visit our prisons.
So firstly, thank you for the opportunity to present today. In my presentation, I'm going to talk about trauma-informed practice in the Housing Executive, with a particular focus on the delivery of homelessness services. So first of all, just to set a bit of context, because there's a perception about homelessness that it's only rough sleeping. Last year we assessed dealt with 18,202 applicants who presented as household or homeless. That's households, not individuals. Of those, 12,512 were accepted as statutorily homeless. So there's huge numbers, and that 12,512, that's rising year on year in terms of the acceptances. It's a reflection on the increase in vulnerability and complexity that our staff are having to deal with. I could talk about what I perceive to be the difficulties in the delivery of homelessness services, but it's better from a service user's perspective. So I'm going to use this video that was developed by the Northern Ireland Youth Forum, who've kindly allowed me to use this today.
At the age of 14, I was living at home in Armagh with my mummy and my 2 little sisters. My mummy and daddy were separated. I went to St. Catherine's College. I didn't really do anything in my spare time because my sisters were too young to be left with my mum, as she had a bad drug misuse problem. Things at home started to get really, really bad. So I stopped going to school to stay home to look after my wee sister. At the time, my mummy couldn't even string a sentence together, never mind look after her. So I had to do everything for my wee sister. At this time, I was just so worried. Because I hadn't been going to school, they kept sending court letters out till my mum. My mum wasn't replying, so the teacher called to my mum's house and my mum was out cold as she was taking drugs and she couldn't wake up. The teacher phoned social services and they came out with the police at 1 a.m. in the morning. I'll never forget this. It was awful. They told me that they were taking me. I was kicking and screaming. I didn't want to leave my sister, but the police held me down and handcuffed me. They had to take me to the Armagh police station. Then they had to take me to the Newry police station, and then they finally dropped me off till Kilkeel, till a foster home at 3 in the morning. I had 54 different foster placements from November to June. I was moved at least a couple of times a week, from Dungannon to Portrush to Coleraine to Newry, all in 1 week. At that time, I just felt like nobody wanted me, and I couldn't settle. Whenever you tell people you're in foster care, they automatically assume that you're the bad person. On my 18th birthday, social services says that I couldn't live with Maria anymore. I was raging, I was mad, and I started eventually taking drugs. This got so out of control, I ended up overdosing and spent a week in intensive care. This was definitely my wake-up call. Social services found me a place in a hostel in Armagh a week later, but it wasn't the right place for me. It was full of adults and I just felt really scared. I only lasted a week. I went to the housing executive in Armagh with all of my stuff in 3 black bags. They told me that there was nowhere local and they sent me in a taxi to Belfast. The Northern Ireland Housing Executive in Belfast was shut. It was my first time being in Belfast. Didn't know where I was going, only knew that it was a place called Centenary House. So picture me walking about with my black bags, asking people where Centenary House was at 10 o'clock at night. I finally arrived at Centenary House, but there was no crash beds left. I felt like a mug, have came the whole way till a different town with nowhere to go. I finally run into a girl I knew, and she says that there was a place called the Ormo Centre and it had crash beds. So she took me there and it was a fair jaunt away. They let us sleep on their sofa for the night. The next day I went to the Northern Ireland Housing Executive in Belfast. They got me a place in Malone Foyer. I stayed here from January until June.
So from our perspective, that's a very difficult video to watch, but we are learning the lessons from that. We're working very closely with the Health and Social Care Board and other key stakeholders through the delivery of 3 strategies and a number of other agreements. So there's the Homelessness Strategy, Interdepartmental Homelessness Action Plan and Chronic Homelessness Action Plan, and that really is responsive to the fact that collaborative working is required to make sure that young people and people from all demographics don't fall between the gaps like that young lady there. So in terms of what we're doing now, from a strategy and policy context, we have a commitment to trauma-informed practice. So examples of what we're doing to avoid re-traumatising people is discharge protocols. We've developed a discharge protocol for Holywell Hospital with the Northern Health and Social Care Trust. We're working with the prison service to develop discharge protocols for prison, and that's making sure that there's a planned discharge, a planned sort of move over. Young persons peer support. As a direct response to that video, we've received DFC change funding. We've employed 2 youth apprentices and they're basically telling us what's wrong with our services and how we can address them. Long term, those 2 young people are going to be advocates and peer mentors for the delivery of homelessness services, but we've got to be responsive to their capability on that. Common Assessment Framework is basically an assessment form that identifies the support needs of applicants. So instead of them telling a very emotive and personal story repeatedly, with their permission we can share it with other statutory agencies and providers. And then finally, a benefit of this course is we're trying to link in with other government organisations. We did a bit of work with the Department for Communities, Department for Education, Department for Health, and there's a lot of work that we want to build on as a result of this course. In terms of what we would like to do, as the organisation with the statutory responsibility for delivering the homelessness strategy, we can go beyond the housing executive, develop trauma-informed practice across the homelessness sector. Internally, we want to raise the profile of trauma-informed practice. So, for example, get it on the agenda of our board. And then finally, this is just a quote that we've picked up. I was at an event last week and it really hit home. We want to develop and deliver empathetic, personalised services which prevent homelessness. If we prevent homelessness, we're avoiding the trauma and we're avoiding the compassion and empathy fatigue.
So my name is Nicola Topping and I'm Head of Support Services for Pupil Wellbeing within the Education Authority. And Joanna Brown from SBNI and the Implementation Manager for Education, we're kind of tag teaming this afternoon in relation to this. So we just want to tell you a little bit about becoming a trauma-informed education sector. Okay. This is partly by way of context. So the total population of Northern Ireland, you probably all know, is about 1.8 million. The number of school-aged children is 335,000 and the number of schools is 1,130. The Education Authority is the biggest public sector employer with approximately 40,000 staff. When we add that to our other colleagues such as CCMS, who are an employing authority, the Controlled School Support Council as a support service, and ETI, our reach, our impact, our influence is very significant. And I think I want to say that, and particularly around trauma-informed practice, our opportunities to make a difference in the lives of our children and our employees is far-reaching.
So our task was to transform the education sector to becoming trauma-informed. So how did we do that? Well, we started off with a stakeholder engagement, and fortunately we had Deirdre McAllister from the National Children's Bureau, who introduced a systems change tool. So what we wanted to know was we wanted to get the key leaders around the table to look at what did we know already about ACEs and trauma-informed practice, what were we doing that linked with those initiatives, were we doing anything that linked with those initiatives, and how did we prepare the supporting agencies to be trauma-informed? So how did we ensure that compassionate leadership was threaded right across the supportive agencies before we even went into the schools and the colleges? So we identified trauma champions right across the sector, and those trauma champions became part of the Training for Trainers programme. We then set up the steering group within within EA, and that co-designed some training programmes that would eventually go out to our schools. But then in terms of compassionate leadership, so what we learned from the course is that we have to be present. We have to be present in the minds of children, but we also have to be present in the minds of the staff. And to do that, we have to actively listen to our staff and what were our staff saying. But we have to listen to understand. So we took workshops out to the principals of our colleges, our schools, and our nurseries as well. And we used Sure Start as a model of trauma-informed practice. We also used St John the Baptist, who are present in the room today, and in terms of their work in creating a trauma-informed nurturing school, and that's a post-primary school. So a lot of these initiatives are happening within our primary schools, but that school is unique because it is a post-primary school, and their main aim is caring for children. That is the foundation of their work. Are our children okay? Are our staff okay?
We worked together with Joanna to co-design training materials. Those training materials were then delivered and will be delivered by the end of March to between 350 and 400 staff. We have trained nearly 40 staff through the Training for Trainers programme to allow us to take this forward. We also have listened to the voices of our children and young people. Our youth service do a regional assessment of need. Thousands of children respond to that and tell us about what they're experiencing and what's going on in their lives. We are also planning some kind of variation on an innovation lab for the end of the month to begin to look at trauma-informed practice and mental health and well-being for our schools and children and young people. So what we're doing all of that with a view to strengths-based approaches, which are the things that you see in the middle of the tree. And what we're hoping for is that now and over time, what we will have is children who are ready to learn, they're involved in their community, they have life skills, they have resilience, they're achieving, they feel safe, and they have the language of emotion, that they're able to describe and experience what is happening for them. But most of all, and it's been said several times through the presentations this morning, is that they have hope. And I think that cannot be underestimated.
I'm Ryan Henderson from the Police Service in Northern Ireland. A real privilege to be here today amongst folk who I've got to know through my participation in the Be the Change programme. So it's great to see so many here today. I suppose, to quote Simon Sinek, we need to start with a why. I mean, why would the Police Service of Northern Ireland need to be trauma-informed, and why does it need to be understand its role in a trauma-informed system? Take 2019, 7 out of every 10 calls that we went to, and we got about 100,000 a year, didn't involve crime. So only 3 in every 10 is actually to do with crime. 7 out of 10 are to do with crisis, vulnerability and trauma. Last year alone, just about 20,000 of the incidents we went to had some mental health footprint across them. Our armed response units who go out and deal with people in crisis with weapons and threats to life, over 50% of those calls have got a mental health footprint within them. Each year we go to in the region of 31,000 domestic abuse incidents. That's 1 every 17 minutes, and in most of those there's a child sat in the room. Probably about 2 to 3 years ago, from us as a service, that trauma is everywhere in what our folk are dealing with. It washes across everyone, and some it absolutely saturates. So we were getting to a real tipping point in terms of the impact on our own staff, seeing significant levels of stress, absence and PTSD, and actually getting to a point where we weren't coping with it. And I took some real interest in Mandy's points around if you're not caring for your staff, how can you expect them to care for communities? So those two things coming together are really what has taken us forward in terms of the need, the why to be more trauma-informed. And that started to lead to a vision of what we wanted to see in terms of police officers and police staff. A vision of someone who is professionally curious, seeing beyond the obvious, understanding that there is a story going on there and having no judgment with it, realising that what has been presented to them is something to do with location, it's something to do with past childhood experience, it's something to do with trauma, and their role in understanding that and being able to deal with that. But also understanding that the impact of them upon dealing with that trauma and how can we do something about that. And that, I guess, has led to the what's and the hows of what are the things that we've done to try and do that.
I mean, some of the things that I have seen personally within my own district, I've seen that real tangible differences. We work with youth workers now. We had a youth conference last year. We bring youth in to challenge us about some of the things that we do, how we can bring trauma through our activities. House search, stop and search. Very challenging, but it's about empowerment, Mandy. You're absolutely right with that. We're actually starting a youth engagement independent advisory group in April here, and that will be a regular thing to give the youth a voice around some of the difficult activities we do. We're seeing our officers recognise cases from domestic abuse incidents, paramilitary style attacks, getting that early intervention in there, liaising with our colleagues in the Education Authority to make sure that schools are aware appropriately for the next morning should kids be coming to school having suffered a traumatic incident the night before.
I have responsibility for student officer training, and I'm delighted to say yesterday was the first ever delivery of the ACES package to our student officers. So every 5 weeks another 50 officers are going to get trained in the level 1 package, which then complements the other training that we have on vulnerability, resilience, self-care, but also care in the community.
It's really important to show and highlight actually what PSNI have done to take care of our workforce. As Ryan alluded to, if we don't look after our own people, we can't look after the people that we serve. I'll rattle through this really quickly. Anybody wants to speak to me afterwards for more details, but there's some redesign of modules that have gone out for student officers, as Catherine's alluded to. We have a resilience training package based on Martin Seligman and Professor Martin Seligman's positive psychology theory. There is a self-support trauma booklet which Dr. Jess Miller and Police Care UK produced. We have access to peer support, and approximately 75 debriefers have been trained now to do post-incident debriefing after a traumatic incident. We have an internal campaign called It's OK, and we've had people from the ACC right down to frontline staff pictured in this campaign, encouraging people to reach out if they are struggling with their mental health. We have also set up our first contemplation room, which is a room completely designed around allowing a safe place for people to go when they need time to diffuse and to take time out from their work. It is a room that has mood lighting, music, aromatherapy oils and self-help guides. There's no TV, there's no kettle, and that is working really well, because we do acknowledge that our police officers and staff are exposed to cumulative trauma on a regular basis by the very nature of their role. And the key here is around early intervention and preventative measures. We also have a line manager toolkit, which is in consultation at the minute, which will be rolled out to first line supervisors to be able to signpost people. So when somebody comes to them saying they need help, they will have that information to hand. And the pilot of wellbeing volunteers, we are talking about the lived experience. So we're recruiting people, officers and staff with lived experience. We are psychologically screening them to make sure they are well enough to perform the role, but they will be a listening ear and provide that additional support.
In terms of systems leadership, your work, it's not about you. You will be a catalyst, but this isn't about you and what you do. It's about you working in the interests of our system and of our end service users. That's what this is about. So not about individual recognition, but what does this mean in terms of the ultimate goals that we are trying to achieve through our systems leadership, through being trauma-informed and creating a trauma-informed nation.
When people started talking about adverse childhood experience and trauma-informed practice, and it started to gain traction, one of the things that helped it get traction were people got a little bit entranced with the science of it, and I know you had Mark Bellis over it, and that's really his space, but people got very much entranced with the epidemiology and the big studies and the neurophysiology of it and what have you. And I could always see the advantages to that. I could see where it was useful, but I was always a little bit nervous that by emphasising that stuff, you maybe missed the real point about what this is all about. I mean, certainly it's a better way to work, and it's a better way because it's more effective. And if you're going to do this work, you have to recognise that addressing trauma in terms of preventing it and responding to its consequences is not the business of a single individual. It can't be. It's not within the gift of teams, an individual team. It's not even within the gift of individual agencies or a government department. It requires you to reach across. You have to have a view, an understanding, a confidence, a generosity that requires you to be able to set aside all the stuff that drives a lot of behaviour normally in our organisational life and start to say, well, we're going to do this a little bit differently. And that, I think, is probably why the Early Intervention Transformation Programme was a good place to look to for funding this activity. Because it was exactly that. It was a collaborative, it was a partnership, it was 6 government departments saying, listen, all our business is connected. A guy called Con Hogan, I never tired talking about this, Vermont years ago, said when it comes to the world of children, everything is connected to everything else. And you need to understand that if you're going to address trauma, if you're going to understand how to harness the information and the scientific knowledge about ACEs,
You need to understand that connection between everything, and you have to start to learn how to work in ways that are collaborative, and that's a value.
Mark Bellis gave us a good overview about the cost of ACEs, and he put it into financial terms. And there is, I think as Sean alluded to, there is compelling evidence about the impact that that has on children, on their development. I mean, anybody who's looked at some of the research about the brain development, it's quite fascinating in those first 2 years, and that's why that early intervention is critical, about behaviours and how it affects people's health generally. I was really interested in terms of what Mandy was saying about trauma-specific services and the difference in that in trauma-informed care. And I think there's good messages in that we need to take away back into the work that we're doing and look at it in the context of the reference group. And I think, as always, and it's come out repeatedly, be mindful of the impact of the trauma as much on our staff as on our service users. And I thought that was well reflected in the Belfast project about the admin staff. I thought that was excellent. We want to be an agent for change, and I suppose become sort of strategic drivers, and we want to start influencing legislation, policy, the departments, and I think that's a challenge for us going forward. Sean talked about collaborative working, talked about compassionate leadership, about empathy, about listening, but fundamentally, and it's up here on the slide at the back, we have to give people hope that things can be better, and we have a duty to do that. And it is about working together, it's about changing the culture, but just a footnote to that, this takes time. We've heard from Mandy, we are not going to change the culture and the way people approach things overnight, but I think we're in a good space in terms of where Northern Ireland is and some of the work that we've done already, but we've got to build on it. But in all that we do, we should strive for excellence, but do it with humility, with respect, and as Sean said, with kindness. We can all make a difference as far as I'm concerned, but collectively we can do so much more. And it's as James says, exchange the me for the we, because we have a real opportunity, collectively as a group, to actually be the legacy. So let's go out there and start and make some changes. All right, thank you.